are back. So last week, I was joined by Dr. Janet Farrell Leontiou. We'll call her Janet now going forward. We talked about the process. And the next step in finding out our work and getting through it and overcoming all the obstacles we talked about, in my opinion, is the resistance to the process. And we can talk about resistance in a number of ways. To me, it comes from two bodies of work that I've read. Stephen Pressfield talks about the resistance as overcoming the work and putting in the work needed to achieve your goals. Ryan Holiday talks about resistance as it's your ego talking you out of accomplishing what you want. So, and we've discussed it in terms of language. A great way, and we talked about it with my own problems involving the ability to write really well. It's something I've struggled with my whole life. In a lot of ways, Ryan Holiday would suggest my issue comes from my ego telling me that I have this sense of who I am, and I don't want to do something that's below that sense of who I am. So I now build all these words. I'm a terrible writer. I'm not great at it. So I can insulate my ego from being bruised, from failing. Whereas Stephen Pressfield would say, that's great. You just now need to go lock yourself in a room every day for the next 10 years and write every day. And you'll come out 10 years later a really good writer with some stuff to share. So for instance, today's a beautiful day. We both could be doing different things. Walk in the park, it's 70 degrees in New York City. And part of that could be resistance. Our body is telling us, hey, I don't have to go in and record this podcast today. I could simply go to Central Park, blow the entire day off. But the logical side of my brain is like, no, I want to do this. And I need to put this work in, right? And we were talking about this last week, is that how many times did we record your A? I think we did our fourth or fifth take. And finally, we put that work in. And it would have been very easy for us to either A, have settled for the first take, but we wanted it to be really good. Right. And we overcame that resistance. We stumbled through some of them. There were moments where we were both like, all right, that wasn't our best. We can do it again, which was the process. So we put down the work as the process, but then we overcame that resistance, which was, I feel like we both had to check our egos at the door and say, hey, this wasn't our best foot forward right now, but that's the resistance. And to me, it's the continuity, showing up day in and day out, properly prepared to execute what your work is, whatever that may be, and literally day by day overcoming that resistance, ignoring the voice that tells you it's easier to quit than it is to stick with it.
When in the word resistance, I think about students and about learning. And I'm thinking about one student in particular who, on the first day of class, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this. On the first day of class, I'm getting a lot of the eye rolling and the kind of that. And I said, and they feed back to me and they say, you said 6 times during an hour, if you don't want to be here, drop. And I just kept saying, if you don't want to be here, drop. If you don't want to be here, drop. And I kept repeating that message. And then we come back the next day and the student is contributing and the student is trying. And I make a comment and I say to the student, nice work today. Good for you. You seem like you're in a different place than you were at the beginning. And the student says that was just all defense mechanisms, right? So I said, oh, good. I'm glad to see that you're working on that. And allowing the student to move on from that, right? So now we're at almost now towards the last third of the semester now. I put them in groups and I'm hearing feedback that she's reverted back to the old style. This is stupid. What do we have to do this for? Which is just more resistance to the process. And I'm using her as a for instance, but I keep telling them with regard to just like, I'm going to start teaching on the first day. I have something up. I'm prepared. I want you to jump in and just engage. That's it. I just want you to start to do that. I want you to engage with the process and forget where it's going. I know where it's going. You don't. You just start to engage. So in fact, with this one group of students, 2 of them were saying that they wanted to jump ship and go to another group. And I said, I'm going to arrange that for you. And I will get you out of there. I will take care of you. So then when I went to the students, the one young woman who's resisting, and I told her, I think that your topic to start to explore is you're returning back to your defense mechanisms that you started with at the beginning of the semester. This is an old script of yours. This is an old habit of yours. It's an obstacle to you learning. And then to the young man in the group, I said, and your obstacle and what you're putting in to impede your capacity to learn is laziness. You're just lazy. And I know that because when I put you in groups, you just sat there. And I said, what? Everybody has to come to you? You're not going to go to them? Right? He also flunked the first test because he didn't have the book. He's lazy. And so I think about those kind of things of what I see in the classroom of resistance to the process and how they're doing things that are not helping them as learners.
I think so. I can relate to that 19-year-old person because ultimately, 20 years ago, that was me walking into your classroom, and I remember our first day. I'm sitting there, and the first thing we had to do was talk about our name, right? And you're like, "My name is. What's your name? Why is it important to you?" And I'm like, I'm sitting there going, like, "What is she talking about?" Because it was so abstract at that point to me. It was the first time in an academic setting I had been asked to think outside of being dictated information to. So, you go to statistics class, they're like, we're going to teach you statistics. Where you go to
The
economics.
curriculum.
Yeah, we're going to, most of the time you're being read out of a textbook. So they're just reciting it to you and then you just have to memorize the information. As long as you can do a decent job of memorizing, you can pull pretty much a B+. I used to like to say, as long as you have a pulse, you're good for a B. If you actually put a little work in, B+, maybe an extra 10 minutes at the end of the day, you're good for an A. And I found that by and large throughout college. But the biggest growth potential in college were from 3 professors I had. The only 3 professors I can probably recall names of off the top of my tongue. One was yours, one was Dr. Means Coleman, and the other was Dr. Burston. 3 hardest classes I've ever taken in my life. They sucked, but the amount of growth I got through that process, the teachers also challenged us the most. So they were the ones who set the bar so high. They said, this is where you need to be, and this is what I expect of you. You either rise to that or you fail the class. It's really that simple. And we're going to use, these metrics to do it by.
Right.
And I'll never forget it. I walked into my senior thesis class, and he's like, you have to write a 15-page paper. Now, this is coming from somebody who at the time was struggling to write 3 pages. And he's like, but you're going to start on it today, so you have 20 weeks to do it. And he opened his door. He goes, I'm in my office every Monday and Wednesday between 1 and 3 o'clock. So I go there the first day. He goes, well, I have great news for you. I said, what's that? He goes, you're going to get 16 weeks of me helping you write your paper. I said, how do you figure? He goes, no one else will come.
Yeah.
I said, oh, great. He goes, the good news is you're going to get an A too, because no one else will come and I'll help you write your paper.
Yeah.
Ironically, I didn't realize at the time I was writing a paper arguing the point of his sister's thesis, because his sister had the same last name and they're both professors. So he goes, ironically, I'm really involved in this subject. I help her write the book that you're arguing against. So it worked out. But a million times throughout the course of that, I wanted to quit. When I was in your classroom, I don't know if I've ever told you this. I think after the first day, I went down to the admissions office and I was like, look, I'm in this communications class and the teacher's talking to me about my name. So I need to switch to a class where we don't talk about that kind of stuff. I need somebody to read me a book, and they're like, well, we have bad news for you. I'm like, what's that? They're like, the only other class we have open is on a Saturday between 9 and 12 o'clock. The Skillet is fully fulfilled. So I said, oh man. So I said, what if I just drop the class? They go, well, then that makes you a part-time student. You lose your student aid. So they said, buddy, you better ride it out for the whole semester. Now, divine intervention universe, obviously something made me stick in that class. And ultimately now, 20 years later, I'm super grateful that I wasn't able to drop out of that class. But at the time, I didn't know what kind of impact that would have on the rest of my life. So I feel bad for the girl who's 19, the student who's probably 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know where she's at. And,
No.
And a lot of times, age brings you the wisdom to reflect back on. Yeah. The times I'm most grateful for in my life were the biggest obstacles I overcame. Anything that came easy, you can't appreciate because it was either A, given to you, or B, came too easy. And, I even see it with my team in my office. We are closest during the greatest times of stress, because under those times of stress, one of 2 things happen. Everyone either digs in and helps each other out and rises to the level of expectation or the level that needs to be met, or they quit. And that's it. They're just not part of the team anymore. Right. But those are the bonding experiences. So in the classroom, it's overcoming that resistance, right? The voice is telling you a million times to quit. And I'm sure there's tons of students who go through this and they choose the easier route. Sometimes the easier route's not available. For me, it wasn't. And it forced me into that scenario. And ultimately, I feel grateful for it now, looking back on it, that I was forced to push myself completely out of what was comfortable for me at the time. There was nothing comfortable about taking your class. As a matter of fact, it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But through discomfort comes growth.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm thinking again about my students, and I'm thinking, and I talk about this. I had one student who, the whole idea of resistance versus perseverance, right? And making the choice to persevere and to initiate, to start something, which I think doesn't get enough press, is to start something. Now, some students, because they're young and because they have no experience, they don't even know that they can start something. And here's the example I'm going to give. And I've been teaching in this position. I've been teaching at this college for 23 years now. I had one student one semester. So the semester starts in September. She starts writing the paper in October. I haven't even gone over what the paper requires. And I go into a lot of detail on the paper. I talk about the paper a lot in the class. She didn't wait for me to assign the paper. She started writing the paper in October. I use that as an example in the classroom now, and I bring in all of her versions. She wrote the paper 5 times. Okay, so she writes a draft, she gives it to me, I critique it, I give it back to her. She comes to my office hours, we go over the paper, she writes it again. 5 times she does this. And I say to my students, is there any way that she's not getting an A? Of course she's getting an A. She set it up that she's getting an A. But she had to persevere, she had to take initiative, and she saw the whole thing as fun. She liked the revision process. She liked working on making it improved and making it better. But that's one student. How many students have I had? 23 years. I teach 5 to 6 classes per semester. It's a lot of people I've encountered. She's one.
But it goes to the saying, proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. And it goes to, maybe if she had just written one version, she gets a C.
Yeah.
Maybe she gets a D.
Yeah.
Maybe her paper's horrible. But with 5 revisions, maybe she wrote an A paper at the end.
Yeah.
And if not, she did A work.
Yeah. And see, this is what I mean with regard to making choices that will have a particular outcome that you want, instead of doing nothing and then, which is also characteristic of some students, doing nothing and then coming to the professor and saying, I need to get an A in this class. Well, that means nothing to me. Like you telling me you need to get an A in this class is like saying, you need to grow hair again. It makes no difference. Yep. But Anthony, it is a severe disconnect. They don't understand it. They don't see it. And I get it. They're young. They don't have experience in the world. They don't understand. But like I present the case of that one student writing the paper 5 times, and they'll say things like, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't even think about that. That's the difference, is she thought about it and she made it happen for herself. And she structured her experience so that there's no way that she's going to get anything less than excellent. And not because she's do it, but because she worked for it.
She put herself in a position where it's undeniable.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly. And I love the professor who said to you, today's your lucky day. And he's also right, like students don't take advantage of what's in front of them. And that you have to take the step out. Nothing is going to fall in your lap. But there's the resistance. Going out of one's comfort zone, taking initiative, putting myself out there. What if I get rejected? What if he's mean to me? All these kind of boogeyman scenarios that we go through that just paralyzes us. And we don't get anything. But I love we've talked before about the framing. Hey, you know what? Today is your lucky day. You're going to do really well here. He's kind of setting you up.
He set me up for the A.
He set you up for the A.
100%. And with that now, I'm a big believer in people will rise to the level you expect them to. If you put no expectations on people,
right,
what are they going to rise to? And I think about it, my stepdaughter wanted to do competitive gymnastics. So she worked so hard for 6 months to do it. She makes the team. 2 practices and she comes home. She's like, Aunt, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're just 6 months in, like you did it. You worked. They gave you like a set thing of 5 things you needed to do. You crushed it. We're so proud of you. She's like, I am sore. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, it's 2 hours and then a half hour of conditioning at the end of the practice. So it's a lot now physically.
Yeah.
So she was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I'm like, well, you want this, what you wanted. So the lesson here is going to be, your mother and I think that you should stick with it. But you don't have to. But your mother worked her butt off to be able to pay for these classes for you, which weren't cheap. You set the goal. So I think it's fair that for the next 2 months, you have to go every week and finish out the classes. Even if you don't want to do it, you can sit there and watch them do it. She looked at me and was like, huh? That's going to be boring. I'm like, I know. That's why you're going to do it for the next 2 months. And then after 2 months and you've tried it, then you can stop doing it if you don't want to. They're still doing it. They love it. They got
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. They came home and they were like 6 weeks in. They're like, oh, it's not that bad anymore. I'm not sore anymore.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'm so proud of you. Now, if you don't want to do it, the lesson learned though was,
wow,
you can't just quit. You can, just because you tried it now and you don't like it, that's not how life works sometimes. And I see it here as we try to hire people, and Sylvia and I do all the interviewing, and Sylvia's sitting over there behind the camera, and she can attest to it. She sits in the room with me and people come in and they go, they have no qualifications. Let's start with that, right? Have you ever worked in a wedding photography studio? Most of the time the answer is no. So you're coming in here not knowing what we do, and they want to be CEO. Like, it's like, what do you pay an hour? Well, that's what we pay. Well, that's not enough for me. What are you doing right now? Oh, I'm unemployed. Well, then it's way more than what you're making now. I hate to break you the news flash, and it's like, I'm like, if you take the job, and let's say you only stay here 3 months, I'm willing to bet you walk away with something for the rest of your life that you can use, even if it's just how to use Photoshop, because you'll learn here more than what you already know. But people come in with the attitude that they're ready to run the organization or run the company.
Right.
Not realizing that that's not how it works, and to them, they're not even willing to test the resistance. They quit before it even starts. That to me is when somebody comes in with that big of an ego that they can't have the self-reflection to realize that they know nothing or know very little, that it's already a done deal, because that attitude is just going to get them nowhere, because they're the person who's in the room who thinks they're the smartest person in the room. Where I think it's a lot easier to go through life being the most humble, most knowledge-seeking person in the room. Doesn't matter who the smartest is, but be the most inquisitive, and you can always learn something from somebody. Whereas when you walk in with the I know everything attitude, especially in a business setting, not to mention nobody wants to work with somebody like that, but you take out the part where you can learn something.
Yeah, so your attitude is already shutting down the possibility of you learning, moving, growing, changing. And so, of the expression, we're our own worst enemies, right? So that you're doing something that is your ego, that is your defense mechanism, but ultimately it is your undoing, right? And this is the thing that with regard to students, and I also appreciate it for myself too, is it's so clear what they're doing, but with ourselves, we don't see how we're doing it ourselves, right? And so, when I listen to you, I think, oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, I've done that. Oh yeah, no wonder why they don't want to work with me. It's so much harder to see oneself and what you're doing, but with the students, it's transparent. And your comment makes me think of Socrates, my hero, of the story of the Oracle of Delphi. And he goes to the Oracle and he asks, who's the wisest of all men? And the Oracle says, you are. And he says, how could that be? I know so little. And the Oracle says, that's because that's how you're wise, because you know your own limitations. So, the whole idea of again, we don't see this model too much in the world. Admission of ignorance is the beginning of all knowing. Right? You have to recognize, and we can talk about this too, which is, I think, really, really important. You have to recognize, what are your gaps of knowledge? Like, for instance, I don't know anything about you. It really, I don't live in your head. I don't live in your life. So I have to take the humble subordinate position when you're telling me about your life. And so we could talk about it in the context of work, in the context of relationships. I think it's magnificent what you said to your daughter. And I reflect back on my own experiences and know that I didn't say the same message. And I said, you can give it up. You could let it go. And now I reflect on it, and probably that wasn't the best thing to have done in the certain setting that I'm thinking about with regard to my own role as a parent. But I think that was really smart of that. If you just see, because what you did was so interesting, because you gave her an end date. This is not something she's going to have to stay with for the rest of her life. This is what you're going to stay with for this duration. And how you use that time during that duration, do whatever you want. And so what you let her do was to ride through the resistance.
And the beautiful part about it was the self-confidence that was developed as she overcame the resistance. You saw a kid who maybe a little tentative every once in a while, who really blossomed into being much more confident. And self-confidence came with that because she overcame it. And she did it on her own with hard work. And I was like,
I think that was really smart.
It was beautiful to watch because I was like, now you can take that. And I said to her, I said, Val, you can apply this to the rest, everything for the rest of your life, whatever you decide you want to do. You want to be a doctor, fashion designer, whatever it is. The world's yours.
Yeah.
Just that one made this. If I leave you with one thing in life from my time I've spent with you, you can overcome anything you want in your life if you put your mind to it. I said, and I'm really proud of you. I think that's awesome what you did. And she was proud of herself, which was awesome to see because you're like, oh, she overcame that. And look at what now she's able to do.
And see, and this is what we can talk about later on, I'm sure, in the sessions that unfold. What you did also was you built a capacity for memory so that she has the memory of that experience that she can always return back to as she moves forward in her life. That's now within her. And the perspective is, if I push through the resistance, which then didn't even become resistance, then I know now with this thing that I'm facing, I don't have to quit. I don't have to make it a big deal. I have to just ride through it. But she already has now that memory within her. I think that's awesome. I think that was a good parenting day.
It was one of the few I've had, but it was
that was awesome.
It was good. It was good. But something I was driving here today, and I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had Kevin Hart on, and I know we were talking about this before, and we're talking about resistance. Kevin Hart talked about resistance, and he got really deep into it. And what I thought was really amazing is, arguably, he's the greatest comic of our decade in terms of at least sales numbers and Netflix views. Kevin Hart is number one, box office hits, all those things. But he talked about his process for writing new material. And I think this is what really applies to this conversation and applies to all of us, is that he first off takes 2 years to write 1 hour. This is a man who's reached all heights, economic heights, could stop doing it. 2 years, 1 hour of comedy. When you think about it, he spends 700 and some odd days for 1 hour. He then starts 1 hour at small comedy clubs, which he tours for 6 months, 8 times a week is what the numbers he gave, to start to sharpen the sword. Then after that, he does small theaters for another 6 months. Again, refining. Then he went on and did his worldwide tour, which took a year, 142 times before he would actually record that. And then when he looked back on, we wouldn't notice it, but he goes, there's no such thing as perfect, because he noticed he missed a couple of cues here and there. But that was as good as it got for him. And I was like, man, this guy's one of the greatest in the world at what he does. And look at how much resistance he still has to overcome just to produce an hour of his craft. And I thought that was amazing for him to give that for people who think they want everything instantaneous. And then he referenced it back to social media. And that was where it was really cool. He goes, people only see that last minute.
Yeah.
They see the highlight.
Yeah.
They missed the 2 years when I locked myself in the room. I was shooting a movie Monday through Thursday, and then went and did a comedy club Thursday, double Friday, double Saturday, double Sunday. They don't see that. They just see the end product. And we talked about that through the process.
Right.
And he's like, they don't see when I bomb. They weren't in that comedy club with 80 people in the cellar in New York City when I totally blew it. And I'm standing there as Kevin Hart. Nobody's laughing. He goes, it sucks. He goes, I'm used to making people laugh, and sometimes they don't. And I'm going, man, that's cool that someone as great as him is still talking about committing to the process and then putting in that work over and over. And, our last talk is going to be on purpose, which I know you're really passionate about, because I feel like we have to go through the process, overcome the resistance, but the purpose of why we do the work is really the most important part of that, because the purpose will define.
Yeah.
And when you have a deeper purpose, for me, at least with this work, right? I've been a wedding photographer for 23 years, but when I came into this project with you, I made my purpose really simple. I'm like, we're going to commit Mondays to doing this every week, right? That was easy. We said, we'll commit to it. We'll do it. But the purpose behind the work was for me to change one life. right? If we can get one person to watch this podcast, I was like, that is as easy as it and small as it gets. One person changes something in their life that then changes something else in the world.
Yeah.
It will have been a success.
Yeah.
And it's that small. But that's the purpose behind it. So every time I come to work to do this, because it's work, right? I think we need to delineate between the two. People say that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
I disagree with that.
Yeah.
Work is work.
Yeah.
Fun is fun.
Yeah.
Laying at the beach is not work.
Yeah.
Coming to work is work. You can love your work and have a deep purpose to your work. It's still work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With that being said, putting in that work and daily grind helps you, in my opinion. Showing up every day helps you overcome the resistance. But then as I'm starting to discover, having a deeper purpose to your work makes showing up to do that work a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about all the interviews that you've had with the people who come in and want to start running the place from the start, from the get-go. And I think it's really, and I'm going to have another look at Kevin Hart because he's an irritant to me. So I have to see what's in him, because I think it's so instructive for him to tell that story so that you can hear that. And it references back to what you talked about last time with regard to athletes and Kobe Bryant and his approach and how he handles which is very similar to what Kevin Hart is talking about too. So all these people in the top of their game, the commonality in so many of them in some major ways in which they approach what it is that they do, and how instructive it is for them to speak that so that young people can hear him and understand, yeah, I only see that snippet as the last picture, and I don't understand what went into it. And again, like the whole idea of if nobody tells you that, how do you know? How do you know that that's the way to do it? You just think, oh, that guy just gets up and he's brilliant right out of the gate, and I'm not, so therefore I'm just going to give it up. I'm not going to even try to do it. Because I think that's how kids make sense of the world, right? They look at the ball player or the comedian or anybody, an actor, anybody who gets himself to a certain place, and then they say, well, I'm not at that place, so therefore I'm not going to even continue doing it.
Well, there's the misconception that greatness is born, not developed.
Right.
And Malcolm Gladwell talks about this really brilliantly, is that Bill Gates, from the age of 13, I believe, was working in a Michigan computer lab. He wasn't born that. He's a brilliant mind, yes, but he had access to a computer lab from the time he was a teenager.
Yeah.
So yes, then he becomes Bill Gates without access to that computer lab, of which he used to lock himself in every day, endless hours.
So interesting.
The Beatles, before they became the Beatles, had played thousands of live shows for free in bars around London. No one talks about that.
Yeah.
And so when they became the Beatles, they'd already done that show a million times.
Yeah.
They were just doing what they normally do, which was go play music.
Yeah.
But people think, oh, they're the Beatles. No, like that.
Yeah.
They put 5 talented musicians, met up, the universe brought them together and all those things. But there's an immense amount of work that went into, immense amount of failure, immense amount of rejection. How many people, didn't like their music? How many people, when they went to the bar and there was nobody there, they still showed up, put the work in and played. And he makes a great example for it. And he breaks down this whole God-given ability thing, and he throws it really in the garbage and says, it's not that. They had something they were passionate about. They showed up even when they didn't want to. They put the work in. They had the commitment. And then out of that work and commitment and dedication to a daily practice, never missing a show, always putting it in, then they became something. And I don't think it's any different if you're a student. It's how you show up as a student, how you show up as an athlete, how you show up as a professor.
Yeah.
And I've had professors in college who didn't show up. They read it from a textbook. I don't need to pay money to have somebody read to me.
Yeah.
I'm blessed with the ability to read.
Right.
I don't need to pay for it to have somebody regurgitate material.
Right.
And you walk away from those classes and you go, what'd you learn? Well, I learned how to memorize some stuff on the test so I could get a good grade.
Right. And see, this is the thing that we'll keep circling back to. Also, I didn't know that about Bill Gates when he was 13 years old. It might even be younger.
That's
really interesting. Yeah. See, but this is the mythology in the culture that just sprung out of a garage somewhere with some adults formulating this box, right? But that's the story we tell ourselves. But we don't tell the other story, which is, how did that start? How did you get access to that? How did that happen for you? So even if I make the connection to Frankl's book, and I keep stressing, there's so much philosophy within his book, right? It's grounded in philosophy. He's a student of philosophy. He studied philosophy. He's read philosophy. He has philosophy degrees. He's worked at understanding philosophy. That's how he came to logotherapy. He didn't just come to logotherapy like that.
Sure.
Because he studied all these other theories. He took an old theory and put it into a new bottle and changed the label on it. That's all he did, right? But if you don't know anything about his process and you don't know anything about philosophy and ideas, you think he just went into this and he came up with this theory by sitting in a room and writing this book. It's not how it works. And then the other thing is, even when he went into the camp, he was already going into the camp wondering, how do you distinguish somebody who kills themselves versus somebody who tries to stay in it for the long haul? Because he went in. He was already working on a study of kids in his town as a psychiatrist, of kids killing themselves around report card time. So he already came in with the question, why do people kill themselves? It didn't happen within the camps. It happened a long time before that. And that's the whole thing that we're talking about here, which is, right, and I talk to my students and I talk about this all the time, follow your own curiosity and your own inclination that's pulling you in a certain place, because you never know where it's going to lead.
And I think, when you bring up Viktor Frankl and we talk about resistance, there's probably very few human beings who've ever been met with such resistance to their work. I mean, he was locked in a concentration camp, and he still found a deeper meaning and purpose to overcome the resistance on a daily basis. He could have just quit and died at any point, and no one would have blamed him for it.
Right.
But instead, he used the resistance that he was met with as fuel to what becomes one of the greatest literary works ever.
Right.
How many people could do that?
Right.
It was a lot easier at any given moment to just succumb to the circumstances of starvation, freezing, labor camps, imminent death, watching his friends die, right next to him while he was sleeping. Instead, he took that, which I know we talked about on last time, was when I went to Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins. The one thing I walked away with from there was, leave yourself with the question at every experience throughout the course of your life, why is this happening for me instead of to me? And when you rephrase life circumstances like that, it takes that, it interferes with the resistance. It kind of like short circuits it in a way, because you can look at any life circumstance and say, why did this happen to me? What lesson can I learn from this? Rather than be the victim and go, woe is me, I can't believe this is happening to me.
Right.
Tony talks about how you empower yourself with just that simple question. And you now, instead of being the victim, you're the person who's gaining knowledge from a situation. Right. And Viktor Frankl does that.
Big time. And I would say all of those things that you listed with regard to the circumstances and the conditions, the most profound one of all of those was not being seen as a human being. And that, you talk about that as a resistance. But I think a lot of people, and we've talked about this before, have to deal with that in this world right now of not being seen as a human being.
Well, I think that was awesome today. And we'll be back next week, wrapping up this 3-part series, talking about our life's purpose, which I know will be a great topic for you.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
Awesome.
Thank you.